This is Public Access Michiana, and actually, front headlines of the paper was they're thinking of not using the word Michiana, and we're thinking of the same. We're thinking of calling ourselves Citizens for Community Media, and in April we're going to have the regional conference for Alliance for Community Media, and hopefully that's going to galvanize our community to get behind Channel 99 and get behind this idea of the people having their own voice. And what we're up against is controlled discourse.
Yes.
And here locally we can take on issues that usually aren't taken on. And we're going to try to discuss what Dr. Jones was invited over to Iran to try to partake of a discussion over there on basically American racial injustice issues, ironically in Iran. The editorial just a couple days ago by the fellow that runs the cultural center there on Washington Street had a nice long viewpoint, and it was, "We have a blind spot on race and injustice." And he closes by saying, "Nevertheless, as long as white people hold on to the belief that silence is an option, the struggle will continue." He's talking about the struggle in the black community. Well, oftentimes there's just one opinion on this, and
Sure.
obviously Mike Jones looks at it differently. And the question is, are we allowed to look at things differently? Can we hear different viewpoints? And we're here to kind of listen a little bit to what Mike's viewpoint is, but I think we're in agreement that the Christian viewpoint is where the truth is. You got Robert Smith here, who's a deacon at
Greater St. John.
Greater St. John's. We're in Doulos Chapel here with Mario Sims. Mario and I used to have a lot of shows, and oftentimes we would quote the scriptures, especially about how we are the slaves of Christ. And in the Civil War, you had, it was a big, huge debate, but there was all these scriptures that says, "Slaves, obey your masters as unto Christ. Wives, obey your husbands as unto Christ." I mean, these are shocking verses for a culture that has gone adrift. So Mario's invited us into his office here at Doulos Chapel, and Mike just went to Iran and came back, and he has quite a story. So can we begin the discussion?
Yeah, this is a follow-up on the show we did before I left. I presented what I thought was going to be my paper, the paper I was going to give at this conference, which was called On the Brink. It's organized by a group called New Horizon. They've done conferences on Hollywood and other topics before. And I thought, this is good. It's a great idea because you're going to what is pretty much a neutral territory. It's Iran. They don't really have a dog in this fight at all. And I said that, actually, when I got there, they first presented me with the book that I had just done in Farsi, first book I've had translated into Farsi. And they gave it to me, and I said, I think that this is Iran's role. It's kind of like a neutral place where people can come together and talk about things. You can say things in Iran that you can't say any place in the world. So that was my beginning. Well, it turns out that it wasn't that way, unfortunately. I said before I got started, I said, here's the paper. This is what I think, the contribution I think I can make. I said, if you accept the conventional narrative at face value, you're not going to get to the bottom of it, and it's going to be a waste of time. Well, when we got there, they accepted the conventional narrative at face value. It could have been like an article in this, a Michiana point of view in the South Bend Tribune, because if you want to get into like psychology here, the Iranians are the most hospitable people on the face of the earth. They have this notion of desert hospitality. The guest is there. You want to take care of your guests. So this is the situation. And then you put two women in charge of the thing, and they're even more sympathetic. And suddenly you've got the inmates taking over the asylum, which is basically what happened to the conference. I was there was a Spaniard, there was an Irishman. And the rest of these guys were black guys from America, a lot of them from the south side of Chicago, a lot of black Muslims. And basically what they did was take over the conference. And so basically their description of it became normative, and it became more and more vehement as we're going along, and there was more and more shouting. And what happened, I think, is that the Iranians got intimidated. Because it's what one of the guys told me. He took me aside and he said, he'd been in Africa. He said, he's thinking these people are Africans. They're not Africans, but anyway. They're excitable people, he said, and we don't want anything to happen. And so as a result, I'm waiting to give my talk, and I don't give my talk. Now, I understand if you don't want to hear what I have to say. That's not a problem. But you accepted the paper. And I traveled halfway around the world here to give a paper, and then suddenly my time comes, and I'm not giving the paper. And I thought, well, this is annoying, to put it mildly, because we're all busy people. We all have things to do. I love being with the Iranian people. I love these people. But, it's a big trip, and I have other things to do. So then I went and talked to the head of the organizer of the thing, who has a TV show that has a lot of following, 11 million people. And he said to me, kind of dancing around, and said, but I'll put you on the TV show. So last night, right before I get on my plane, we do the TV show with the Iranian, and I get to say pretty much my piece. And on the way, back, he says, we were worried. We were worried at the reaction, because I was going to say, one of the things I said was that George Soros is funding Ferguson. And one of the main contributions I was trying to make here was that you can't understand the black-white situation in America unless you understand the Black-Jewish alliance. Because one of the main things that white does is cover over the fact that there was a huge Jewish participation in all of these movements throughout the 20th century, including and especially the civil rights movement. Beginning with the NAACP, the Jews founded organizations that were to mobilize blacks in this country and basically sent them off making them their revolutionary movement. So Marcus Garvey shows up at NAACP headquarters in the 1920s, and there are no black people here. It's all Jewish lawyers. Well, I said, you can't understand that. You can't understand what's going on unless you understand the beginnings of the NAACP, all the way up to George Soros, another big Jew who now spent $33 million to get Ferguson on the headlines. And I think that the dime finally dropped when I said what we're talking about is proxy warriors, because the Iranians understand that. Because what we're talking about is the emergence of the CIA state after World War II. The beginning in 1953 when Eisenhower gets elected and the CIA moves into the White House, and then we create all this covert warfare. Iran was the first place to go, the Mossadegh coup in 1953, and they've done it all the way up to the present. They've never changed. And now we have a huge crisis in Syria because the proxy warfare isn't working anymore. They created Frankensteins. They're called ISIS now, but it's the Frankenstein monster that these people created. And so what I tried to do, at this point, I think the dime dropped. And I think they finally understood the implications of what's going on. And so in a sense, I think it was a success after all. We kind of made up afterwards. They're going to post the article that's going to appear in the December issue of Culture Wars on the conference website. The article is going to go into a book that's going to come out in Farsi on the Black-Jewish Alliance. That'll be the introduction. And so I think in spite of that stumbling beginning, I think the dialogue did begin. But I mean, my hope is that we're part of the world too now, you know. We get on YouTube even though we're in Indiana, right? And that we can continue this discussion here, the one that didn't take place there. That's my hope, because my fundamental feeling is that this is artificially created. This thing has been artificially created. It's my experience, not just here in South Bend, but also in Cincinnati. You go, my son lives in Over the Rhine. It's a black neighborhood that was heavily involved in the whole social engineering of the city, driving the white people out, moving these people in, and so on and so forth. Now it's getting gentrified. But you sit there at Findlay Market, and maybe it's me, but I don't feel any racial tension in Findlay Market. And I'm a guy who was in the 60s and in the 70s in Philadelphia where I did feel it. I don't feel it anymore. And I think what we're seeing here is, once again, a resurrection of this artificially created conflict in order to achieve some type of goal that is the agenda of the ruling class elite and not in the interest of the people of South Bend.
Which seems like the hope is a local hope. If we can maintain Christian love and relationships, we're less likely to, they can target us and manipulate us.
Well, I as I was listening to Mike talk, I wanted, there are a couple things there were a lot of things that jumped out that I think we could probably spend a long time on. We don't have time, but you start out by saying controlled discourse, and I would submit to you that this is censorship, but not only censorship, you also have thought control. The race issues in America are essentially where you take a camera and you put a camera on a small percentage of a population in one location, and you now magnify that to give the appearance that this is occurring all throughout America, so you create an emergency, which only benefits, if you look at it, you follow the money game. What's the money game? Well, it's the media, they sell newspapers. As I recall from looking at facts, that the news shows generate more revenue than any other show. It's the most profitable show on television because it's nothing more than giving somebody a script and talking heads talk. So you have to understand then who owns the media outlets that would want to have people want to tune in. And in order to tune in, it goes back to if it bleeds, it leads. Well, what's a greater story than seeing a bunch of black people in the street throwing rocks and getting these visceral opinions that, in essence, divide America now? So now people have something to talk about. That, what are the blacks upset about? And you have black people shaking their fists at white people. And when the reality is, that's not the reality of America. That's not the reality that many of us experience on a day-to-day basis in America. So I think you have to examine why this is occurring. And when Mike talks about George Soros, it opens up a dialogue that requires you now to think about what he's saying. Instead of this, oh my God, he's in Iran. Well, you go back to understand, again, a thinking person understands why the Iranians were upset at us because of this CIA involvement, which created an organization called the SAVAK, which punished the Iranian people under a puppet government that was propped up by us. And so then you need to begin, in order to formulate an intelligent thought, you have to do some background research. You're not going to get that information in controlled discourse because they're only going to feed you enough information to lead you to go to the conclusion that they want you to go to, which is a tremendous race problem in America. Right. And so shows like this are important because now you have not controlled discourse, but intelligent, fact-based discourse that is supported by the Bible.
Right, and I think that's the key, is that we do have the scriptures to help us.
Sure.
And when you don't have that,
well,
what's going to be what's your common reference point?
Well, okay, Jesus said, I am the truth. Okay. Well, obviously, if you look at the attack is, well, no, he's not the truth. Listen to our truth here.
Yeah.
And that's what's going on. You've had a subversion of the truth. You have an attack against the Bible. And so why? Well, it's because if you attack the Bible and force it to be closed and it's antiquated, it's against civil rights. Well, whose civil rights? Well, the civil rights of the LGBT community. You see, then you have the Bible pushed aside, and now you have new thought.
Well, here's an example. There's a girl that's at Missouri in Columbia. That's a freshman, and I know her mom. She was in the Upward Bound and met her husband there. So that family goes way back in here in South Bend. So I've been on the phone talking about this, about how her daughter's doing there. Well, the daughter was really prepared to be a Christian and to be prepared about the non-Christian influences when she went to college. So she saw what was going on at Missouri, and of course she's black, and she didn't think it was Christian. She didn't want to get involved. She's there to study. Her relationships with the white people are fine, and she didn't want to jump in on that. And that's what you have to ask yourself. What should I do here? How should I respond? I mean, and if you're not trained, if you're not sensitive, Lord, what should I do? You don't even ask that. Yeah. What do you could be misled.
Well, as a pastor, I mean, my response is always to open your Bible and to allow the Spirit to lead. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. That's scriptural. The things that are confronting us are addressed in Scripture. They're not dictated by goings on that appear on camera that are rigidly controlled as to what your storyline is. I mean, this is Orwellian. What goes on in America now is we have this group thought that is controlled by a handful of people that are telling us that there are problems confronting America that in reality are not caused by white people trying to oppress black people. And as I read your articles, what I always try and tell people is, when you say Black Lives Matter, does it mean it matters to a gangbanger who just killed some 9-year-old kid in Chicago? Because apparently black lives did matter to a black person. So there's a greater issue than this simplistic mantra of Black Lives Matter, that if we go scriptural, we understand this is a deception from Satan, and we need to back up and look at this bitter brew that's being cooked in this pot.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's why I tried to focus the discussion on the south side of Chicago.
Yes.
430 people were murdered in Chicago last year. 80% of those people are black. If Black Lives Matter, why aren't we talking about Chicago? And that's a low number compared to what it was during the 70s and 80s, when it was up into the 500, 600, 700, even 900 people being murdered every year. So we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about that part because it leads us into a whole other area that the media don't want to talk about. But there's one thing I wanted to talk about in terms of scripture. I was meditating on the beginning of the Gospel of St. John when I'm over there. The beginning is, in Greek, it's ein arche, ein ha logos. In the beginning there was logos, the Greek word for reason, for order. And these Iranian kids are coming up to me, and they're trying to understand, what's the world coming to? What is this ISIS? How can that be Islam? What does this mean? What you see is chaos wherever you look. And the more you see chaos, the more they have a need for logos.
Yes.
And that's what they're looking for.
Yes.
They're looking for someone to say, this is the logos. This is the logos. And then it says, right after that, it says, in Latin, it says, verbum erat Deus. And logos was God.
Yeah.
Well, this is profound, because you've got a whole group of Muslims now who don't feel that there's any logos in God, and all it is will and power, and they're chopping people's heads off. And these people are looking for some type of logos. These Iranian students are looking for some type of logos. And that's, I think, the moment of opportunity to apply it to something like this discussion.
Also, in biblical history, there was nearly 400 years just between the Old Testament and the New. One of the issues that was found early on is that the leaders of the faith, mainly the Hebrew faith, they failed. They were permitting all types of illegal just activities to go on. They did not speak up on the injustices that were done. It was just a lack of leadership, mainly moral leadership on their part, and also they failed to follow the laws as it was given to Moses, and they failed to live up to the prophecies that the Old Testament leaders had prophesied at that time. And in my view, anytime you have a moral decay of your spiritual leaders, you also have a moral decay in the people, and then people are looking for truth, all people are looking for truth. And I think Mike said it best, like when little kids are asking for it, then you know that something is really missing,
Yeah.
But you notice that when we used to have outreach ministries, we went to Riley back in the early 80s, and I was always impressed because we'd pass out tracts when we were going to school. But the black community, the children, the students, were the most eager to receive.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be because they're being targeted. They're under, their homes are under attack. You have to look at the suffering. The chaos that's trying to invade into their world. And the leaders, we have to step in and say, hold it here. And the Word of God is for sure, they know that that's where their help is going to come from.
I think they were specifically targeted. I tried to address this in the article. The Black Panthers were a Jewish-funded operation. They were in many ways a Jewish revolutionary fantasy. David Horowitz raised money for the Black Panthers. He's now the famous neoconservative Muslim basher at this point. He got the money from Bert Schneider, who was the producer of Easy Rider, made a lot of money in Hollywood. This was Hollywood money going into basically what was a Jewish fantasy. And the Jewish fantasy at that time was the black revolutionary. And the best example you can give is that picture of Huey Newton sitting in that chair, in that rattan chair. Got his black beret on, he's got his black afro, got his black leather jacket, he's got a spear in one hand and a gun in the other. And this just sent a thrill. The Jews in Hollywood were just thrilled to death with this image. And then it gets to Chicago. They found a branch in Chicago, and suddenly the government gets tired of it. We're tired of this. It's the same thing with ISIS right now in Syria. These guys, the government thinks they're out of control, so they send a black guy in, COINTELPRO, the police come in and murder them.
Fred Hampton and all that.
All those guys were murdered. They were murdered by, this is, once again, if you're going to sign up for another Jewish fantasy, maybe you should contemplate this. Because it was the black people that died there. It wasn't the Jewish producer. It wasn't David Horowitz. It was the black people who died there in Chicago because they were living out this fantasy.
And Mario, you went there.
Yeah, and as he was saying that, I reflected on being a senior in high school in December of 1969 and taking a day off school and actually driving. I think the apartment was on Warren Boulevard and going in. Because, the police had said that they came at 4 or 5 in the morning to serve a warrant. And the Panthers were shut out. That was no way true. You could see, in fact, I think it's the first documented case of a police assassination, which grew out of the COINTELPRO, and there was a person inside the Panthers who had, in fact, given them some sort of sleeping medication.
Bobby Neal. He was an FBI agent provocateur.
Absolutely. And
he was the one who told them to buy the guns, too.
Yeah. So, again, when you talk about the logos, had they have understood truth, they wouldn't be dead that day. these things wouldn't have happened. And that is a dramatic underscoring of the whole point that I think we're trying to make here, that there is a need for people to understand who God is and God is truth, because it is so easy for someone to get romanticized and be used as an extension of someone's personality, or to be misused as someone's surrogate, as the Black Panthers were. It was my dad forcefully kept me from buying into the romanticism of, and that's the reason that I would never at that age join, because my dad said this is just ludicrous. I mean,
Right, so they're the father in the home.
yeah, the father in the home.
And you're alive today
Yes,
to tell the tale.
exactly,
You wouldn't be if you were there at Black Panther headquarters.
exactly.
Right, and we're about the same age. I mean, in
Right.
Wisconsin, they had some wild stuff, and at that age, you just can't wait to jump in because you're competitive,
Right.
and you want to prove what you're doing.
Well, mention Wisconsin, you think of the Weather Underground and the Yippies and those
I was
organizations.
surrounded
who were-
by it. My cousins, yeah.
Who were coming out of there and going into Chicago and trying to radicalize members of the ghetto,
Sure.
and those kind of
Sure.
things. Because these
Well,
people
this,
would,
this was a persistent Jewish
Yes.
fantasy for the entire 20th century. And then it kind of broke down at the end of the 60s. When the blacks like Harold Cruz, when he wrote The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, woke up, he was involved in the Communist Party in Harlem, and he wrote a book in '67 and said basically, we were just pawns.
Yeah.
The Jews were telling us what to do. We had no say in what we were doing, and I'm tired of it, and I'm out of here. And at that point, the whole thing sort of broke down. And at that point, this is not part of the conventional narrative, but I'm saying they came up with another paradigm, and it was Gordon Parks.
Yeah.
A Time Life magazine, famous guy,
Yeah.
who was then brought to Hollywood and say, we need a new paradigm. And the new paradigm is going to be Shaft. That was the first one. And then it was Superfly. His son did Superfly. And then suddenly you saw all these guys on the south side of Chicago, no more black berets. You got the big maxi, big hat, the Cadillac Eldorado, the maxi coat, and within 2 years, this had a tremendously disruptive effect on the sexual morals of the people of the black side of Chicago. And Gloria Hardy told me that in person. Her own life had been wrecked by this film and the people acting out their sexual fantasies with real people. And so within 2 years of Superfly, you have 940 people dead, murdered in Chicago. 940 people, it's the highest it's ever been since that time, within 2 years of Superfly, and 80% of those people were black.
Well, what was in Superfly that would cause people to want to kill people? Kill each other?
I'm
Was
saying
it sexual?
Superfly, basically you have the sexualization of the black culture, one more sexualization of many. And once you have that sexualization, it's like man and woman coming together is like the atom of society. Okay, you split that atom, it's going to be just like splitting the other atom, and you're going to release all of this destructive energy, and that's what's been happening ever since.
well, they were appropriately called black exploitation movies. They were essentially fantasies that people adapted as real life. They wanted to be Superfly.
Because their family life wasn't strong enough. Like you had a good father,
Sure,
so you were less vulnerable.
No, I think you're putting the cart before the horse. Their family life wasn't strong enough because they were imitating these guys.
Yeah.
Gordon Parks knew. He said specifically in his autobiography that he was told that what they needed was a new role model.
Yeah.
This is what, now Gordon Parks is before he goes to Hollywood, he's working for Time Life.
It's photography.
Time Life and the CIA are basically concentric circles. We know that now from Dave Wemhoff's book. We know the whole, C.D. Jackson was on the board of Time Life. He was also a CIA agent. Gordon Parks was real black. He was real black, and his job at Time Life was to infiltrate black organizations. First, the Nation of Islam, and then the Black Panther Party. Went over to Algeria, paid Eldridge Cleaver $10,000 for an interview. I guarantee you that money did not come out of Gordon Parks' pocket. That was CIA money. He got it from C.D. Jackson to pay for the interview. And his job is to go into the apartment and say, well, Eldridge and his wife, they sleep in this bedroom and so on and so forth. Or when they come in. That's what his story was. Now, this does not fit into the conventional narrative of white racism keeping these people down. That's not what was going on here. And I was trying to say that if you have that paradigm as your interpretive lens, you're not going to understand what's going on here.
You know, essentially what happened was these movies, as Mike, I'm 63 years old and coming up on the west side of Chicago, you understand that in the 50s and 60s, being a pimp was not something to be proud of and was not glorified.
No.
Most of the people that I came up with, their mom and dad worked. In fact, a lot of them worked in Armor Star because we had then we had the meat processing plants and those type of things in Chicago. Chicago, of course, had benefited from the migration in the South, going to the various factories, and these were hardworking factory people. But all of a sudden now you have this promise of driving a Cadillac and having a lot of women, and so you go from a pimp being an outcast in the black community to all of a sudden now being glorified in the black community. So I never really thought about what Mike is saying, which is why I really enjoy reading his article, because the dime dropped in my head. And instead of blaming rap music, and then but you have to go back. You have to turn the clock back to the late 60s and mid 70s when this propaganda started coming out, which moved people away from the truth. So you've got the movement from Logos, which is part of this diabolical plan to move people from rational, spirit-led thought, the knowledge of God, to, let's go to the movie and let's see how we should be.
It's a long distance away where it says the women are to be silent in the church, and if you want to learn anything, go back to your home and talk to your husband. In other words, the husband's given a lot of authority to be the spiritual head.
Well, that was changed, though. That dynamic, as Mike pointed out in these movies, was changed. It was changed that the man could love them and leave them and drive off in his car, and that was the whole focus, was to be cool and to have a lot of women. So you have now the baby's daddy and baby's mama generation, where there was no the breakdown of the family occurred in the black community beginning in the late 60s and 70s because of the response to this movie. Churches lost their appeal. Why should we give you money when I can go buy a Cadillac and be cool and have a lot of women?
Well, that opens up a whole nother critique on what are movies, why are they so effective and what's happening? I mean, how dangerous are they? I mean, that's a whole nother.
Well, movies have influenced the way people think for years.
Absolutely.
During the 20s, there was this movie,
Birth of a Nation.
Right,
Exactly.
Birth of a Nation.
Exactly.
And it caused people to think negatively towards blacks. And those thoughts in the movies, people actually lived those out. And also during World War II, there were movies made there to occupy the minds of the people, just to take their minds off the war, or to picture the Japanese and the Germans there as terrible people, and then the problem comes in once the war is over. How are you to think of those people then? And also, if you look at movies now, the producers, they all say, I am trying to make America think about this. I am trying to provoke this thought, It's all a form of mind control, portraying this image, making you think that you are a part of this image,
Yes.
It's mind control.
Yeah.
Right, and Hollywood does not have very many Christians.
Well, I think we should also acknowledge the fact that for Mike to have to go to Iran to be able to have this discourse, and even to have that impacted by a group that comes over there who try and hijack, in fact, did hijacked his efforts to speak the truth, based on their agenda, which was, as you mentioned, the folks that came from the south side of Chicago. Well, I mean, they're part of the problem. They should have probably spent time in Chicago addressing these pressing needs in Chicago of really what is nothing more than genocide. I mean, this is, and had this been in any other country, we would be decrying the genocide that's occurring in Chicago at the hands of black people. But it's not addressed. And that really should be the most troubling aspect. I'm not troubled by what's going on at Missouri at a college. I'm troubled about black genocide in America. I'm not troubled by the issues of race in America as a predominant threat to the existence of any people. I'm more concerned about a people who've been programmed to hate themselves to the point that we're seeing mass violence being committed against all ages and all economic levels in Chicago by black people.
Yeah. I think we're seeing a crisis the crisis about social engineering.
Yes.
Nobody talks about
Certainly.
social engineering,
Certainly.
but social engineering began with the race issue.
Yes.
We're talking about Gunnar Myrdal's book,
Yes.
The American Dilemma. It comes out in the middle of the war, 1942. It's written by the psychological warfare establishment. It sets the plan for America after World War II. And basically, the south side of Chicago was the battleground because they decreed that the plan is basically, we got all these black folk down in the south. They're wasting their time picking cotton. We need them up here with the working in the factories of Detroit, making arms. We're going to bring them up and we're going to kill two birds with one stone. We're going to drive the Catholic ethnics out of their neighborhood. They'll go into the suburbs. The blacks will take over these old neighborhoods on the south side, and everything will be great because we're in charge and we're the social engineers and we can turn the levers and make everything work out. Well, it hasn't worked out, has it? Hasn't worked out on the south side of Chicago. It's not working out in Syria. It's not working out anywhere. And I think one of the things I was mentioning beforehand was this sudden weird shift now. Everybody's talking about homosexuals in the spring, and now all we're talking about is blacks now.
Yeah.
What happened to the homosexuals? Wait a minute, where are they? Well, because I think if you put a gun to somebody like Bill Clinton's head, and you say, what's good about America? He would say the civil rights movement. And what he's talking about is basically social engineering.
Yes.
We solved this problem. Well, guess what? We haven't solved the problem. And the proof is the south side of Chicago. The proof is Syria. And there's a crisis right now. And I think that's why we have people like George Soros funding this resurrection of racial conflict because he's trying to unify everybody, even in the process of dividing them by saying, well, we're solving this problem again. Social engineering is still going to solve this problem. This is the crux of the matter right now. Social engineering has failed, and no one's allowed to talk about it. No one's allowed to talk about the casualties of social engineering, whether they're the white Italians or Poles or whoever got driven out of their neighborhood, or the black people that got brought up here as cheap labor and then got used as cannon fodder in some type of weird revolutionary movement.
Well, people aren't allowed to talk about it because George Soros has made billions of dollars off of it, and in doing that, money is power. I mean, he's been able to engineer legislation to allow him to buy a defunct bank in California, which then created this special favored son legislation that allows him to foreclose on houses but still get paid for the loans, and let these houses sit across the landscape, destroying property values throughout America. But that's not talked about.
Well, because we're orchestrating a racial
Yeah.
conflict to divert everyone's attention
Attention,
from
exactly.
the fact that these guys are destroying the country with their economic policies.
That's right.
We're not supposed to talk about big finance. That's
That's
for
right.
important people in Wall Street. We're just here to be drawn into an artificially created fight so that we can leave those people alone and they can make their billions of dollars.
Well, we're fighting each other.
Fighting each other. That was the whole problem. The difference between then and now, I think, is that back then nobody understood what was going on. Nobody understood that we were being the Catholic ethnics and the blacks were being thrown into a fight that neither of them understood because nobody understood what social engineering was. Nobody had this part of their vocabulary. But now I think we have the vocabulary to deal with it in a much more effective manner.
Well, but now that you have the vocabulary, you need the vehicle to get it out, and that's why you had to go to Iran. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, there's a clear understanding and a clear-eyed understanding of what the problem is. The problem now is you have controlled discourse. I mean, we look at the local media here; it's controlled, so they're not going to stick a microphone in front of Mike's mouth. Well, in fact, when we did. Look at the backlash of the accusations that came out.
Here's this picture.
We were called bigoted, and Mike
I was called a racist.
Racist.
See all those black faces there? What am I doing with all those black faces? I'm a racist.
I mean, so I had to spend time saying, look, I've been in this battle for over 30 years, and I consider him a friend, and I think that not only the term Renaissance man when it comes to Mike is. I don't even think it fits, but it begins to give you an understanding of this is a patriot who clearly understands how far we've come from the truth of the Logos. But see, he's got to, anytime you stand up and speak truth, mud is going to be thrown on you. And so now he has to defend himself from speaking truth. And that's one of the reasons that I stand with him, because I'm not going to allow someone who is who has an oracle from God to be defamed, hooted down, or be
defriended on Facebook. Yeah. I mean, talk about where
the really ultimate insult.
Yeah, hitting you where you hurt, unfriended on Facebook.
Yeah, that is where this is at in America. You know, America has never, more people graduated from college. Education is at the forefront of everyone's mind. But now you have intelligent discourse being hijacked.
Well, can you have, Indiana Constitution says that the purpose of the public schools is to encourage by all suitable means moral improvement. When they've removed the moral, how could you be intelligent if you're not referencing what you're saying to the moral,
Peter,
to morality?
From knowing you and your experiences, I mean, all you have to do is understand the time that you were teaching and you had your Bible in the school. What happened?
I know this. I'll tell you this. At Adams, I used to be at Adams High School all the time.
What happened? I mean,
I don't know if it was just accidental, but it was the Jewish lady in charge of the journalism openly lied to the principal that I was passing out this Jesus newspaper.
I remember that
we had produced. And so I was kicked out of Adams. I couldn't fight it. And within a week or two of being kicked out of Adams, they're telling me they had 10 or so many squad cars coming in to surround Adams. No, I'm not taking any claim that I'm I'm this big spiritual warrior. But you do those little things. I'd get on the bus. I might be the only white person on the bus, on the city bus. It's a silent witness. They know who I am. Yeah. They knew who I was in the school. When you remove those influences, the presence of the Bible or that Christian witness that's not afraid to speak when you can speak, then the police are going to have to come in.
That's right. One of the things that they showed in the conference at Iran was that clip of the girl in school in South Carolina. I don't know whether you've seen it.
Yeah.
It's it must be 20 seconds at most. And basically, there she is. She's sitting in the desk. The policeman comes in, grabs her, throws her on the floor, drags her out of the room, end the clip. And then everybody then starts, spouting off about what they're... Well, I have my own interpretation of this. You know, I was a substitute teacher in Philadelphia. My wife was a teacher in Philadelphia in the 70s. I walked into a 6th grade classroom, and there is total chaos in this classroom, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and there is one black girl kicking another black girl in the head. So this looks like serious, so I go over there, I forget what her name was, but
Shamika,
anyway.
I think I read yours. Something.
Okay, I said, you can't, she said, I can't say what she said on cable access, but anyway, I end up bleeding. She's biting me and scratching me. Somebody comes in and takes her off my hands, literally takes her off my hands. Now, there were no police in the school at that point, but that's why there are police in the school now, because the situation got out of control. So what is the situation here? Well, it turns out that she was on her cell phone. The young lady here was talking on her cell phone. The teacher says, well, it's time to start class. Ain't nobody, and so you have this confrontation. She's not going to get off her cell phone. And now we have a situation where we have police in the school. You have to call the police in. The policeman comes in and says, well, it's time, ain't nobody. And then this is physical force time. That's physical force. It's not pleasant, but that's what physical force is. And that's the situation. Well, that's what you got to talk about.
Yeah.
Instead of using little clips like this for agitprop among people, and I'm talking about the Iranians now, who don't understand the situation.
I don't think their culture understands.
They don't have a culture like this. They have a 2,500-year-old culture that has reverence for authority, among other things. And so they don't understand it, and it's not fair to them to kind of impose this agitprop on this situation.
It's hard to understand. I was talking with Judy, who retired teaching, and she said it was often the black girl would say, well, why do I have to obey you? I don't have to obey my mom. And,
Well,
it's like...
Well, I'm saying this is the Jewish revolutionary spirit. It's infected all of us, and it's infected the black population probably even more than the rest of the population.
Well, I think scripturally it says the spirit that works in the children of disobedience.
Yeah.
And however you get disobedient, I mean, you could blame it on the Jews, which I don't think is a wise thing to do. You have to take your own responsibility.
Right.
I mean, right? When you get disobedient, you can't say, well, the serpent made me do it. Well, God didn't accept Eve. Eve couldn't get away with that.
Well, I know from my experience as a Protestant sitting on a school board at a Catholic school that we at PTA, we'd have 100% parent participation. It would be unthinkable for a student to disobey a teacher because you had the teamwork of the parent and the school saying that you're here for your education and not to disrespect authority. So again, we go back to what Mike had said about, the Gospel of John, the logos, that in order to learn, you have to have structure. There has to be a structured environment, and not an environment where you've got a kid coming in thinking that it's totally acceptable to be disruptive in this environment. When you take logos out, when you take God out, when you take logic, when you take truth out, then you lend yourself to these controlled 10-second shots of American life that there's more than 10 seconds that you need to understand what happened here.
That's right.
I mean,
right.
there's much more. I mean, wait a second. How did we get to this? How do we get to this kid who's got a cell phone who thinks it's okay to do this? See, it's not the police.
It's almost his calling.
There are probably 1,000 incidents like this, and there are probably 900 incidents where it's a black cop coming in and having to drag the girl out. But we're not going to show that picture, because that's not the story we want to tell.
It's controlled discourse, as you started out by saying. That's troubling because the other word for that is censorship, which we know, of course, the First Amendment. We have a first, but right now we're experiencing an assault on what are our traditional American values? Now we said we're a Christian country, but now that's being challenged. So
we're also watching the destruction of representative government.
Yes.
Because what we're seeing is minorities now have veto power over whatever the majority says, as long as it is sanctioned by the ruling class elite. And the classic example was here in March with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Yeah.
Where basically the governor passes something that's saying people like Mario or people like who bake cakes aren't going to be forced to take part in a gay wedding. And the elites, the CEOs, the Jews who run the media, and the homosexuals, all of whom are minorities, they create a jihad against the state of Indiana. And so a CEO flies in from San Francisco and rewrites the law. Well, wait a minute. Do we have a government or not? Did we elect this governor? Did we elect these representatives? Why is this guy from San Francisco given the power to overthrow our laws? Well, because that's what's going on across the board here.
Yeah.
We have no representative government, or we have representative government as long as you're going to talk about how high the grass is supposed to grow before we find you, which they did for months here at the city council meeting. You know, as long as you deal with that type of stuff, you have sovereignty. As soon as you cross us, forget it. We take over, we throw your government out, and that's this revolutionary movement.
Well, that falls back on what Bob is saying about the leadership.
Well,
Yeah. And also the major issue is people having the right to different opinions, and it's not nothing new. You know, most of us around the table have Bibles, and then if we look at Martin Luther and the Catholic Church, he had to leave the church to form his own just religion due to a difference of opinion, and also with the Inquisition that went on back in history, I think during the 1500s or so. People who had a different opinion from the Catholic Church were burned or either placed on a rack and stretched. It is always the ruling power or the people who have the power. They are the ones who are stopping the individuals from expressing their views, you know. And in this country, we had Thomas Paine who wanted to speak out, you know, and then out of the problems in which we had with England, this country was formed, you know. Now, in England, they do have this park at which people can go and they can stand and speak and they can say anything they want to. And sometimes the press will publish what is said there. Sometimes the press doesn't. But the issue is the media, that's the hard copy print newspaper, the TV stations, the radio stations there, they only print or let out the news that is going to help the ruling class, you know. Nothing is done to help the poor, and they will publish news that will keep people busy, like how do you feed people during Christmas time. They'll have many articles on that, you know. But about people's homes being taken, you don't see a lot of print on that. They're about the real cause of the black-on-black crime. You don't see a lot of news about that, about how to fix that. But in Chicago, as we said, it's getting worse and worse and worse. But if we have a crime, well, a murder to occur in a upscale neighborhood, we'll have forces of officers there trying to solve that crime. But the black-on-black crime, you know, it's the weekend, people are gonna kill people, let it happen, you know. And And so I think all of us are saying the same thing. It is a ruling class that decides what news actually gets out.
Well, let me add that, how do you define the ruling class? And that goes back to the social engineering or engineering consent. See, don't forget, we didn't say Jesus Christ was the authority when we created this country. It's not in the Constitution. Authority is the consent of the governed. So whoever can manufacture consent, well, because the consent is where the authority is, okay? Well, the truth in reality is who's manipulating it. Who's manipulating this consent?
Sure, it's the Achilles heel of this form of government.
That's exactly it.
Right.
That's exactly it.
Right, and that's where the movies fit in, and that's where they
And
know.
the other Achilles heel is money, where people with lots of money buy representatives, and then the Congress is basically representing the rich people, and that's it.
Yeah. Follow the money.
Well, I mean, we've seen it here locally, and that's why I really like, Mike's magazine, because it does its best to get. In fact, there was an article that you were going to publish that you weren't able to publish because there was some information in there which is 100% true. It was because it named some names that shouldn't have been named, that it couldn't have been published. Okay, but. And so my point is, if you say ruling class and consent, in South Bend we see this playing out under a microscope, that thought is controlled here, power is obtained through thought control, power is maintained through thought control. The media publishes what, as Bob is talking about, fluff stories without ever. And when you stand up and you have truth, then the truth speaker is not ignored. The truth speaker is slandered, is defamed, is minimized. They try and destabilize the person. It's insidious. I mean, okay, ignore the truth speaker, but if that's what you want to do, but they go beyond ignoring the truth speaker and try and drive a stake in the heart of the person speaking the truth. So there's no dialogue. It's just monologue.
But that is what we've been called to do. I mean, when Jesus said, "Take up your cross daily,"
truth to power. I mean, as men of God, we certainly.
But I mean, look what we have now. We have a Rhodes Scholar who is now running South Bend. Cecil Rhodes, remember Cecil Rhodes?
Well, he was
the
gay
empire
himself.
builder in Africa.
South Africa, exactly.
He was the guy who tried to make sure that the white races could rule over the black races. That's the descendant. Pete Buttigieg is a spiritual descendant of Cecil Rhodes. And in a sense, that's what we got here. We're a colony of the ruling class elite. They appoint proconsuls like Pete Buttigieg. The local paper after the election, 80%, he gets 80% of the vote. Well, did you read how many people showed up to vote?
Not many.
14% showed up to vote.
Yeah.
11% voted for Pete, of the registered voters, voted for Pete Buttigieg. If this election were held in Bosnia, sponsored by the United Nations, they'd have to declare it invalid.
Yeah.
This is a proconsul. This is not a representative of the people of South Bend, Indiana.
And that reminds me of where Cecil Rhodes and where they're really coming from. You know, Darwin's book, Origin of Species, he said, or he wanted to call it, or you can call it the preservation of favored races.
Yeah.
I mean,
This is antithetical to our form of government.
Yes.
This is antithetical to representative government. And if you say that now, you're demonized.
Absolutely. And that is, I think, the point that I really want to make clear in this show, that I have seen this where we took the picture, this group was the poster image of exactly what Mike is saying. As men of God, we are commanded, as doulos, as servants, as bond servants of God, we're commanded when the proconsul stands up and says, not only am I gay, but I want your children also to look at me as a role model. Well, that requires a response from men of God. We have a responsibility to say, no, the Bible says, and this is what the Creator has determined society should look like. So when you have a leader stand up and say this, and we stand up and say that, the effort is to destroy the logos. To
Okay.
destroy those who speak the logos.
Unfortunately,
I love this.
logo says time is coming to an end, and and it would be good if we could continue pursuing the truth in
Sure.
these areas, because there's, like you said earlier, we need to have more dialogue on this,
Yes.
and even at your church, you were saying we need
Yeah.
to do this. So, but this is Public Access Michiana. We're thinking about the name Citizens for Community Media, but we want people to get behind this type of new dialogue, challenging the conventional narrative on many things. So, till the next time for public access, we wish everybody God's blessings.
God bless you.